In this video, we're going to look at 10 ways that you can improve your paintings right now. So let's get started. Hi, my name is Jerry Sumter with The Fine Article. And I would like to share with you today 10 ways that you can improve your work even now, even today. And these are actually accumulated bits of insight that I've gained over the last number of years that I've been teaching, and I've been teaching for a while. The first of 10 would be, there should only really be one motive in a painting. If you have more than that, your painting's going to sink. If you're painting a particular painting for a reason, let us know what that reason is. It's not enough to paint something well. I mean, for the most part, viewers will look at something that's simply rendered well, that has no message, as showy or exquisitely beautiful in a very vacuous way. But it won't really have a story. And human beings, we love stories. We like to be able to know why someone is presenting something to us. So one motif. A motif also is not a focal point. So it's not a certain area or spot in a painting where we want to draw the viewer's attention. No, it's more like the color of the sky on that day that was just so striking. It imbues the entire atmosphere. Or the way that the model's eyes in this particular lighting on this particular day, or for whatever reason you wanted to paint that model, what it was about her or him that makes you want to tell the story. Is there a reason why you're painting this person? Cinema has very clear genres, and they will have storylines, right? If we don't know what those storylines are, we'll tend to want to walk out of the movie. We know B movies and worse. And let's face it, when you're learning to paint, you're going to make a lot of B movies. And they're not all going to be blockbusters. So what I'm trying to sort of pull you toward is the notion that it's not simply about painting something well. It's about a story that you want to convey. Tip number 2, your lights, your middle values, and your darks should not have equal footing. We shouldn't have paintings with a third, and a third, okay? We really need to have a sense of hierarchy, a sense that there's something that's being spotlit, pulled out into the light, or that's glowing in the dark, or that's simply making good use of the values in a rhythmic or in an interesting way. The closer that we get to equal spacing or the percentages, third of values, the more boring our paintings become. So look out for that. Tip number 3, the proportions of our masses need to be unique, which means that the spacing between trees should not be the same, or the same as the dimension or the width of the trees themselves, okay? So sometimes we want to group trees and have others isolated. We can pull this in many different directions, but the idea is simply that we want to have differently proportioned masses, okay? The next tip would be, large masses are much more important than small ones. Now, I know that some of you are going to be thinking, well, wait a minute. Sometimes the focal point is a small spot. Isn't that important? Yes, it is. In the narrative sense, it is. In the optical or in the visual sense, when we first encounter a painting or any image, if the large shapes don't tell us that there's something interesting to look at from across the room, we'll never be engaged with the painting. We'll never want to walk up to it. We'll never really meet the painting. And it's not about all the small fluctuations that you might want to render or really focus on in the beginning of the painting. It's the large shapes. They are much more important than the small ones. The small ones nuance and give relief to the large shapes. They give added information. They bring those large shapes to life. But without the large shapes, the small shapes don't matter. In fact, too much emphasis on small shapes and you'll destroy or sink your painting. Tip number 5, beautiful abstractions, okay? And what I'm talking about are lines or the shapes themselves, the way that certain forms or objects move the eye through a painting. If those are beautiful in how they flow through a painting, the painting is much more likely to be successful or beautiful itself. If the spacing and the relationships is very unrelated and ugly, because that's ultimately what ugly is. Really, it's about non-relation or a lack of integrity. The painting will lack integrity. The painting will be ugly. So that's a very important thing to think about. Tip number 6, our depth of field as human beings is very shallow. Okay, so our ability to see clarity in depth is nothing like what a camera can give us in a photo. So if you're painting from photos and you're thinking that it's giving you what the human eye sees, your paintings are going to suffer. Okay, you're going to probably copy all of the edge qualities in the photo instead of recognizing, like cinematographers do. They will use lenses that will give them blur in the foreground and the distance where the middle ground is sharper. Too much information, too many sharp edges kill interest. They flatten. Okay? Tip number 7, please stop digging with your brush. It's very common for people who are beginning to paint like this. Okay? In particular, they're using the tips of the brush to apply the paint. Okay, that's digging, and it's one of the fastest ways of making mud, especially if you have more than one color on your canvas. But even when you're not, digging with the tips is sort of like using a rake. Okay, so if you're using the tips of the brush, it's like you're raking through, and you're basically going to be just blending, and not in a very good way. The way that we want to apply paint, we want to put the paint down, okay? Not with the tips, with more of the side, the flat of the side, okay? Even if it's with a round brush, a small round brush, it's the same. We don't want to do this kind of thing. We don't want to rake on or really rake through all of the paint that's down. You're going to be making mush and a mess. Tip number 8, please stop making curved brush strokes. What do I mean by that? Stop making curved brush strokes. Rather than applying paint like we were just describing, I see very commonly students coming in and they're making brush strokes like this. Okay, not only is this with the tips of the brush will have the same level of sharpness that this kind of brush stroke will make. And if we have the same level of sharpness around a round object, what we're really saying is that everything on its edge is the same distance from us. Okay, maybe an orange might have a certain, in reality, a certain edge quality that's the same or similar around the orange, but light will change how we need to depict that. Even more so with objects that have greater dimensional variation, such as an arm or leg or a tree trunk, or tree branch that might have a curve. What we want to do is we want to follow that curve with our brush. Okay. Tip number 9, if you're simply holding your brush in any individual way, it could be holding it out even in this way. Okay, so this is a little bit more painterly than holding a brush like a pencil. Every brush stroke needs to be placed in a way that's appropriate to what the painting needs. Okay, sometimes we need to actually place paint like this. So we're actually making our brush strokes in a way that relates to what the painting needs, not simply putting all of our marks down in a way that's just easy Okay, it's actually kind of a lazy thing to do, and I know that sounds really harsh, but I see people doing it all the time, and unless we know that it's working against us, we're not going to stop doing it. We have to know that it really matters to actually place our brushwork in a way that adds to the painting. Tip number 10, if you're an oil painter or even an acrylic painter, now I tend to be an oil painter, I used to paint with acrylic, so there's some similarities, there's quite a bit of difference, but in this context, it's the same. Paintings that have no paint on them, that simply have the right value and the right hue, are not really paintings, they're stains. It's like a tattoo on a canvas or on a panel. We need to actually use paint. We need to use enough paint to tell the viewer, oh, that this is a painting. Okay, so I know that that's a little bit abstract. It seems like, well, how much paint do I use? And that is a personal answer. But what I would say is that most people, not all, most people when they begin painting don't use enough paint. So if you found this video helpful, please consider giving me a thumbs up down below. And also leave me a comment. Let me know if there are ideas that you would like to see covered in future videos, perhaps even one of the tips that we talked about today. Also, consider subscribing. The aim of this channel is to help painters to develop quickly, in particular beginning and intermediate painters, without spending years in the process of development. So, from my studio to yours, happy painting.